Imagine hearing that an army was approaching your city. Not just any army. An army that had already destroyed kingdoms, crushed powerful empires, and conquered lands stretching thousands of miles. An army so feared that entire cities sometimes surrendered before a single battle even began. This was the Mongol Empire, and for nearly a century, it seemed unstoppable. But how did a group of nomadic horsemen from the vast grasslands of Central Asia become the largest contiguous empire in human history? And why could almost nobody stop them? To answer that question, we have to begin with a man named Genghis Khan. Before he became one of the most famous conquerors in history, he was known as Temujin. He was born around 1162 into a world of tribal warfare, betrayal, and survival. Life on the Mongolian steppe was harsh. Food was scarce. The climate was unforgiving. Tribes constantly fought each other for resources and power. When Temujin was still a child, his father was poisoned by rival tribes. Soon after, his family was abandoned and left to survive alone. For many people, such a beginning would have meant failure. For Temujin, it became the foundation of something extraordinary. Over the following years, he built alliances, defeated rivals, and united the scattered Mongol tribes. In 1206, he was given a new title, Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. For the first time, many of the nomadic tribes of Mongolia were united under a single leader. But uniting the tribes was only the beginning. Genghis Khan had larger ambitions, much larger. One of the biggest reasons for Mongol success was their army. At first glance, Mongol warriors did not seem particularly impressive. They did not wear the heaviest armor. They did not build giant fortresses. They did not possess enormous populations. Yet they repeatedly defeated larger and wealthier enemies. The reason was simple. The Mongols were masters of mobility. Every warrior was an expert horseman. Many learned to ride before they could properly walk. They could travel astonishing distances in a short period of time. While enemy armies were still gathering supplies, Mongol forces could already be at their gates. Their weapons were equally effective. The Mongol composite bow was one of the deadliest weapons of its age. It was powerful, accurate, and deadly even from horseback. Mongol archers could fire while riding at high speed. To many opponents, it seemed almost impossible to fight against them. But military skill alone does not explain their success. The Mongols were also brilliant strategists. They studied their enemies carefully. They gathered intelligence before campaigns. They used scouts extensively. And perhaps most importantly, they mastered psychological warfare. The Mongols understood fear. They understood that a terrified enemy was easier to defeat than a confident one. Stories of Mongol victories spread rapidly. Cities heard what had happened to those who resisted. As a result, many chose surrender over destruction. Sometimes the Mongols won battles before they even began. One famous example occurred during their campaigns against the Khwarezmian Empire. What started as a diplomatic dispute soon exploded into full-scale war. Genghis Khan responded with overwhelming force. Mongol armies swept across Central Asia. Major cities fell one after another. The empire that had once seemed powerful collapsed with shocking speed. The Mongols demonstrated that distance offered little protection. No matter how far their enemies fled, the Mongols often found them. Their military organization was another key advantage. Unlike many medieval armies, the Mongols emphasized discipline and structure. Units were organized into groups of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000. Orders could be communicated efficiently. Commanders were often chosen based on ability rather than noble birth. This allowed talented leaders to rise through the ranks. As a result, Mongol armies remained flexible and effective even during large campaigns. The Mongols also adapted quickly. When they encountered heavily fortified cities, they learned siege warfare. They recruited engineers from conquered territories. They adopted new technologies. Instead of relying only on traditional methods, they constantly improved. This ability to learn made them even more dangerous. Soon, Mongol armies pushed into Eastern Europe. Kingdom after kingdom faced defeat. In 1241, European forces suffered devastating losses at battles such as Legnica and Mohi. The victories shocked Europe. Many feared that the entire continent might fall. For a moment, it seemed possible. Yet something unexpected happened. The Mongols suddenly withdrew. Not because they had been defeated, not because Europe had discovered a secret weapon, but because political events within the Mongol Empire required the return of key leaders. Europe had been spared largely by circumstance. Had events unfolded differently, history might look very different today. Despite their reputation as conquerors, the Mongols did more than wage war. They also created one of the largest trade networks in history. Under Mongol rule, merchants could travel more safely across vast distances. Ideas, technologies, and goods moved between east and west. Historians sometimes refer to this period as the Pax Mongolica. For many regions, it brought stability and economic growth. The Mongol Empire connected cultures that had previously been separated by enormous distances. Yet maintaining such a vast empire was never easy. After the death of Genghis Khan, his descendants continued expanding the empire. But over time, divisions emerged. Different branches of the ruling family controlled different territories. Gradually, the empire fragmented into separate khanates. Although these states remained powerful, the unified empire slowly disappeared. Even so, the legacy of the Mongols remains enormous. They reshaped the political map of Asia and Europe. They transformed trade routes. They influenced warfare for generations. And they built an empire unlike anything the world had ever seen. So why could almost nobody stop the Mongols? It was not because they were invincible. It was because they combined speed, discipline, intelligence, adaptability, and psychological warfare more effectively than almost any military force in history. Their enemies were often fighting yesterday's war. The Mongols were fighting tomorrow's. And by the time many kingdoms understood the threat, it was already too late. From the windswept steppes of Mongolia emerged an empire that terrified nations, changed continents, and altered the course of history forever. Few armies have inspired as much fear. Few leaders have left such a lasting impact. And centuries later, the story of the Mongols still raises the same question. What could have happened if they had never stopped?